episode 1 of Raising the Ceiling. This is a podcast brought to you by Skill Masters, and during this podcast series, we're going to be bringing in experts from around the world in different parts of the youth soccer system and kind of dig deep on a certain aspect that we feel that they are really good at and can give us a lot of insight into what that specific process looks like and how they're doing it during the youth development process inside of their organization. So our first guest, we have somebody that I look up to, my older brother, Josh Henderson. He's been the director of coaching for Surf for the last 10 years, and he's been coaching in youth soccer for the last 25 years. You know, I've been out there and watched you guys a ton out in San Diego from a practice standpoint, from an organization standpoint, and I really love what you guys are doing, and I think it obviously shows in the success that your club has had. So thank you for hopping on today. And so what I want to dig in with Josh today is going to be related to their tryout and selection process. A lot of questions that we see from clients that are coming into our system are, as they're moving on to that next step, or they're being invited into that next step, what is this process going to look like? So if it's all right with you, Josh, we'll just kind of kick it off and get rolling right away.
Absolutely. Let's do it.
All right, cool. So first thing we want to look at is kind of the criteria and evaluation philosophy that you guys have at Surf San Diego, or you do personally. So when you're doing tryouts, kind of what are the 3 to 5 things that you're evaluating most during tryouts, or even the season with players that are then entering into tryouts for the next season?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think first we divide it into 2 categories, right? Where you have the younger kids, the entry-level player, all the way to the top end of youth soccer, which is U19 football. At the entry level, the most important things are that they show a real energy and excitement for being out at the field. We say we want them to fall in love with soccer and fall in love with surf, right? And in order to do that, you have to have a love for the game. So, one of the first things we look for are, when the kids come out to the field, are they excited to be out there? Does it look like mom and dad made them go, or does it look like they wanted to go? And I think at the younger ages, that's really, really important. Once we get past that initial criteria, it becomes about coordination, balance. We don't worry at the younger ages as much about technical ability, because if they're coordinated and balanced and they love to be out there, they're going to be able to put in the time and effort to get technically sound, right? And athleticism is important, but, it's not the end-all be-all ever, but especially at the younger ages. Nobody knows at 5, 6, 7 years old how a kid's going to mature. At least we don't, for sure. So we don't tend to look at that as much, right? We don't try to predict what they'll look like physically, height-wise, strength-wise, speed-wise. But we can tell if they're balanced and coordinated.
Okay, awesome. As the kids get older, so I know you mentioned there, great insight on the younger kids. For the older kids, kind of what does that look like?
Yeah, at the older ages, you expect the kid, because they're older, to be out there because they want to be out there. So you kind of can eliminate that, right? As they get older, they're choosing to be out there. They already have their voice. And the coordination balance aspect, almost every kid that's played a competitive sport for over a number of years has a level of balance and coordination to compete at a good level, right? So we are looking for how sound are they technically through the functions that they need in their position, right? Usually they've found a position or two that they like and they think they excel at, so we can identify our player profile and their technical abilities. Do they match? Right? Do their physical qualities and their technical qualities match up with where they want to play or where we see them playing? The other part of this, obviously, is, the physical part is the strength and the speed. The technical part is obviously what you could do with the ball. But as you get older, the tactical part becomes very, very important, right? Because as the pyramid narrows, a lot of players have technical ability and are physically gifted. They separate themselves by understanding time, space, game scenario, and they understand how to coordinate their body and mind throughout that kind of sphere of what we look for.
Okay, awesome. So digging into that a little bit more, can you give me kind of a setup that you guys do during tryouts to assess that tactical acumen when it comes to the older kids?
Yeah, it starts with a very simple small rondo, right? That's where you get a lot of repetition in maneuvering in and out of space, manipulating time in a small area, right? So we always start with a small rondo. With probably youth 13 and up, every one of them starts with a small rondo at Tryouts, because it gives us a lot of reps to see the kids constantly maneuvering and manipulating time and space.
Okay. And how many kids do you kind of put in a group there when it comes to that?
Look, in an ideal world, the younger you are, you want to start 3v1. Like, you can't move on from 3v1 unless they can do, a good number. As we get older, it's 4v2 into 5v3. Sometimes it's a moving rondo, right? It depends on what level of player, what the sophistication of the rondo is. But we wouldn't go more than a 5v3 plus 1 or 2 on the other side in a moving rondo, but usually stick to a 3v1 or a 4v2.
Okay. And while you're running those rondos, are your coaches out there circling, watching, kind of as they identify somebody? I noticed you guys kind of moved players around. Can you kind of walk through that process and how that works?
Yeah, of course. Like, when you have 150 kids and 75 of them you potentially have no knowledge of or any identifying game film or anything like that, it's difficult, right, to start with. We start with the rondo. You can identify immediately certain aspects, certain qualities of players or lack of qualities of players. And as that happens, we have to move them to eventually where we get to what we think are the better players in an area and the weaker players in an area. Now, it's not a perfect scenario, and it doesn't always happen in that 15, 20-minute rondo period, right? And some kids shine in different things. So it's not like, your kid didn't get moved into a certain rondo, he or she has no chance, right? It's part of the process, and the process is the entire time.
Awesome. No, I love that. That's great to hear. And that was something that I noticed when I watched you guys go through tryouts, which I found fascinating, was just, through each process of the tryout, there was an understanding of where kids excel, and you guys were kind of documenting that and making sure that that was part of the decision-making process. So that's awesome. A different question that we get oftentimes is from the standpoint of late bloomers or kids that are technically sound but smaller in stature, kind of what is your thought process behind evaluating them and or when it comes down to like placement?
Yeah, of
those
course.
Types of individuals.
Well, I think the biggest problem we have in youth sport, not just soccer, and this is a California thing or a San Diego thing. It's not even a national thing. It's probably a worldwide thing. It's really hard to predict, right? Yes, there are some things that can help you decide where they sit in their growth pattern. But even if they get 5'10", that doesn't tell you how athletic and coordinated they're going to be, or how fast they're going to be, or how strong they're going to be, right? Like, height is one decider. So for us, the kids that are a little bit smaller, or a lot smaller sometimes, that are very technical, we try to match up. It becomes very difficult. They're technically gifted enough to be on probably the top team, but they're physically not quite ready to compete at the highest level with the top team. Right? Because soccer is an athletic event at the end of the day. You have to meet some athletic requirements. So in those scenarios with like an elite technical kid that is truly undersized, we would probably have him train with the top team, at least some, if not all, and then play games with a lower level to allow him or her to get confidence with their technical ability. Right? The fallacy of playing up if you're not physically ready, or even playing on the top team when you're not physically ready, we find that even the technically gifted kids that aren't quite able to manipulate the time and space or maneuver quick enough, or maybe the other players and the level just isn't quite where it needs to be yet because they're younger, kids lose confidence because they're not seeing the success with their technical ability on the field because they make a great move and they have a great exit touch and they explode as fast as they can and the kid's 5 inches taller than him and wins the ball. For me, that failure is bad. There's some good failure and there's some bad failure. That's bad failure. Right? If your kid's doing everything right, he scanned, he found the right space, he had the perfect touch, he made the right move, he was explosive in his action after the move, and still isn't successful, it's probably because he's not meeting the athletic requirement, right? And those are the scenarios where we would want those kids to find that success, and that usually means at a lower level.
No, that's amazing insight. I love to hear that. I wish that was a standard thought around this country, and hopefully by getting that out there, this message out there, that people start to understand and think through those things as they're picking this. And same thing for parents that are listening, right? Like, it's okay to be selected to the second team. There's probably a valid reason that they were there, whether or not you think that about your child, but oftentimes coaches are thinking through these types of things when they are making these selections. So that's awesome stuff. Thank you. When it comes to kind of that communication of that child to the parent, if there is pushback, kind of how do you guys handle that type of situation when, hey, in a short space, as you mentioned, like they may be watching the tryout, they killed it in rondos, right? They killed it in 11v11, but at the end of the day, right, you got to compare not just their individual effort, but them in their position against everybody else there and in these decisions. So kind of how do you walk through parents of those types of kids to let them know, like, hey, this is why we're doing this is what we want to do?
Yeah, like that's a difficult one. I wish I had an answer that would be universal and work. Often, and this isn't across the board, but I'm a parent, you're a parent. We love our children so much, we see them through a lens that often most people don't, which is, rose-colored to say the least. So it's not an easy conversation to have, right? First of all. Secondly, rarely ever do parents agree with your assessment if it doesn't meet their idea of where their kids should be. And then three, what's become more common probably in the last 5-7 years is these kids all have private trainers as well, right? And often, not always, often those private trainers are paid to make the kid feel good, right? Enjoy himself, work hard, get a good sweat, and get marginally better or better than marginally better at something. So those private trainers usually aren't honest with the parents. And they don't have to be, because they don't have to decide if they've made a team or they're going to play them, right? And so we hear a lot, well, my kid does private training 5 times a week. His private trainer tells him he should be making this team or that team. He should be playing this position or that position, right? And unfortunately, that's almost never the case, right? And so those conversations are difficult. And we try to be honest. We want them to hear the correct information, but we don't want to destroy them with it either, right? Like, you want to explain to them where their child sits, why he or she sits there, and what they can do to get better. And this is where you see them at the moment, and here is the plan moving forward. Right? If they agree, awesome. If they don't, fair enough. They'll find another place that will give them what they're looking for.
That makes sense. That's awesome. When it comes to a message that you give the player now, right, that stays inside the club, right? Assuming they kind of go along with the plan that you guys presented, maybe they were a little disappointed that they didn't make the team. Kind of what is your message that you guys give to those kids, right, that maybe just missed out or, thought they were there, or you guys even said, like, hey, it ultimately comes down to a numbers game, right? You can only pick so many. There's 3 or 4 kids at the end of the line that you're like, everybody's fighting for in the coach's room. Like, this is who we want. Kind of how is that decision process, if at all, relayed to them? And then also, what type of message are you giving to those players at the end of the day?
Yeah, so soccer is the most difficult sport, in my opinion, to choose a team from. Because as you narrow the numbers on the roster, right? Like, 1 through 6 are easy, maybe even 1 through 13. But once you get through 14 through 20, right? Sometimes it's based solely on positional needs, right? So we'll have a kid that maybe falls 15 out of 18, but he's the 5th best forward and we're only keeping 4, right? And that's always at the older ages, never at the younger ages, and sometimes your starting right back is a very technically gifted but not a great defender. So your backup, you need more of an athletic defensive type in case the game changes and you need to defend, right? More than attack. So it almost never is the best 18 players that come try out make the team, right? Almost never. It's almost always a balance between trying to get the best players but also get the right fit for the team, right? And then there's also the emotional part and the psychology of not being a top 15 player, but so-called getting minutes of the bottom of the roster, right? If you took an all-star team of 18 kids and 15, 16, 17, and 18 are always going to be unhappy, that makes for a bad team experience. They have a bad experience and you probably don't have the success you need. So the other important part of building a team is understanding how the player is going to react if they're starting the season towards the bottom of the roster, right? You don't want them to accept it and not care. You want them to accept it, be angry about it, be driven about it, and want to work to get harder, but not bring everyone else down while they're upset about it.
That makes sense.
Right?
So in digging into that a little more, would you say, this doesn't have to be standard across the board for every team, I get that, but would you say a common philosophy of you would be basically, hey, for taking our roster of 20 kids, we're going to take our top 5, 6, 7 players that just stand out above everybody else, and we're going to put them on the field. And now we're going to do like a needs assessment in the style of play that we want to do and say, hey, these are the gaps we have to fill with these types of players.
Yeah, well, like, I think at some point during the trial process, you probably remove your best players, right? Whatever that number is, every team has a different number, right? It could be 2, it could be 10, right? So forget about a hard number. At some point, you want to eliminate your best players and let the pool of players, let's say it's 12 through 30, right? Or 33, 34, whatever, getting to that 22 number on the field, or 77-14, 99-18, right? You want to eliminate the best players because sometimes, especially the younger they are, the best player brings up everyone else so much. So if you just happen to be on the best players team at tryouts and you get 5 chances in front of goal, right, you're going to look really good. Or in reverse, if you have to defend the best player in tryouts and they're clearly the best player, you're not going to look as good. So at some point, we remove the best players from the equation so we could see truly who's going to stand out now, right? All the superstars are off the field. Now, how do we rate them, right? And then you bring them back again with the smaller pool of people that you've cut, and then you start to see how they interact with the best players, because that's also very important, right? Can't just be they stood out when the best players weren't there. That's a narrowing process. Now you narrow it further with the interaction with the best players.
Now, in saying that, just curious, because I only witnessed the first day. That sounds like a more than 1 day process. Kind of walk me through it. What is the timeline for you guys in regards to kind of finalizing your team? It started last week. When does it end? Like if it's day one, everybody comes out, kind of what's that entire process?
That's a good question. First of all, if they're already at surf, it's a year-long process, right? If they've been at surf for the year, tryouts, the tryout week for a surf player has very little impact, right? It can. I've seen kids move, right? Never really down. Sometimes if a random kid comes out we didn't know about, but it's mostly up because we thought something, we had seen something, but now we've seen something a little even better at tryouts. But for the surf kid, it's a year-long process, right? That process entails coaches and directors meeting weekly, right, with depth charts and talking about positions at the younger ages, how they're progressing, where we see them in the in the older ages positionally. At the older ages, it's strictly their commitment to practice, their commitment to get better, their camaraderie with the team, and their success on the field. But that process is a year long, and it's dripped with training in different teams, potentially if the coach feels he or she's ready, to playing up age groups or to moving up levels. For the new kids, those are the ones that it becomes very difficult. The ones that we know nothing about, right? And it's a 2-day process that probably needs to be a 2-week process, right? Unfortunately, youth soccer doesn't give us that. They just don't, right? Everybody's having tryouts at the same time. Everyone needs to make their teams. Everyone's putting parents under pressure. The parents are worried about losing a spot. So you have to make some decisions. And frankly, because of that, we get it wrong sometimes, right? No doubt about it. But for the kid that's coming to try out, the first impression always is, do they come and say hello, look you in the eye, and shake your hand and introduce themselves, right? Do they have a personality to compete at a high level? Or do they walk on the field, stand by themselves in the corner because they don't know anyone and look like, slightly pouty, right? That's a big indicator for us at the older ages. Yeah. At the younger ages, we wouldn't put a lot of stock into that because, they're still finding themselves and understanding how to introduce themselves. They haven't learned that yet, so we wouldn't judge a younger player by that. But for the older players, that's first impression's big, right? And then we walk them through, it's the warm-up without the ball, right? Are they coordinated? Frankly, can they do the things the basic movements of soccer that are required? And you'd be amazed. You could tell kids right away that aren't coordinated when you warm up without a ball, right? Then you move into the rondo. We've talked about that. And then we'll usually add some small transitional-based game, whether it's a 1v1, a 2v1, a 2v2, a 3v3, that is fast, it's furious, and it's direct competition. Now we can see who's got a little fight, who's got some explosiveness, who can defend, who can attack, and then you finish with a game, right? The first day we usually like to do like a 7v7 game for the 11s to see them in a small-sided. The second day we like to finish with an 11v11. At the smaller ages, we usually go to 7 and 9v9 the first and second day.
Makes sense. And that's that's even for those that you start the 7v7, 9v9s for those that are playing the 9v9.
Yeah, sometimes we'll go into a 4v4 or 5 the first day and then go into a 7v7, 9v9. But, it's also hard when you have 150 kids out, right? Like breaking up 3v3 games, that's 6 kids. Yeah. There is some reality of setting up 25 of those.
No, absolutely.
Right.
So a lot of what we talked about so far has been kind of, I wouldn't say geared to field players, but a lot of field players. Is there anything you guys do for goalkeepers specifically? Or is that a separate tryout and then you bring those into a different tryout? Kind of talk to me about goalkeepers.
Yeah, so there depends on the age. Okay, at the youngest ages of 77, even if a kid says he or she wants to play goalkeeper, we'll keep him in the training and we won't probably do anything separate, right? Because they need to have footwork and play on the field also anyway. There's unique situations out there, but those are the anomalies or outliers. For 9v9 and up, they are removed immediately from the equation. They warm up with the goalkeeping coach. They do a goalkeeping warm-up only to join us once we start moving into a goal scenario. Right? Sometimes, there's not an exact time. Sometimes it's 45 minutes. Sometimes that's an hour. At Tryouts, sometimes it's 30 minutes, right? It kind of changes depending on what we need to see from the group. But their tryout is always completely separate. Our goalkeeper coaches make those decisions, right? Most of the soccer coaches are not also goalkeeper coaches, and it's usually a blind spot for us, right? Like a guy that didn't, or a girl that didn't, a coach that didn't play goalie knows what they like and don't like on the field. They don't like their keeper to give up the ball in possession, and they don't like them to give up a goal. Right? Outside of that, that's about all they know. So to ask our coaches to make those decisions wouldn't be fair on the kid or the coach or the team. So we have experts in the field that train them, make decisions on them, and then the coach says thank you.
How many goalkeepers do you guys typically keep per team?
In an ideal world, it would be 2. Right? You have these gaps in age groups weirdly sometimes, right? Like our 2011 girls age group, we only have 2 keepers for the 2 teams, right? And they're both really good keepers, but you need a goalie on a soccer team, especially at the 11v11 competitive, areas. But in my opinion, you have to keep 2, right?
So do you bring a player up from like the best keeper from the age below to play?
We've done that. We've done that. It's just it's tricky, right? Moving keepers up can be done, but you never want your team to be in the scenario where one player being injured can affect a game, a week, a season, a year, right? And because goalkeeping is such a unique position in soccer, it's the most important position to have someone also there, ready as a backup. And if you're going to do that, you got to give them minutes at times, right? Like I hear these goalkeeper parents all the time, my kid does not want to share time in goal. And I look at them and like, well, that's very selfish of you. Right? It's great to say you want your kid to play all the time. We all want our kid to play all the time. But what happens when your kid misses or they get hurt? Is the team just supposed to quit? Right? Like, oh, we're not playing today. Johnny got hurt, or he had a party to go to, and the mom's, we only want one goalkeeper who are not coming. And that's always been crazy to me. That's like the one position that you need 2.
Yeah. No, that's great insight. That's awesome. So that's going to wrap up our segment going into tryouts, criteria, evaluation, philosophy for you guys. Now I'm going to ask you just some general questions relative to just youth soccer development in the country that we're going to ask every one of our guests, just to, questions that have been given to us by our clients, by people on a Facebook group that we started to kind of talk about, like, hey, what types of questions would you want to ask our guests? The first one's going to be, and I totally understand if you got to answer this in a certain way, kind of what are the biggest gaps you see, especially, and I know you've had international experience as a player, right, between development here in the United States and then international, top international places, England, Spain, Germany, that are producing kind of the world-class superstar names.
Yeah. Well, what it used to be was we had no vision for the future of 25, 30, 40 years ago. There was no one to look up to, so to speak, that you could make real money. That used to be the problem, right? Now with the MLS, into 30 plus years, I think 25, 30 years of success, and a lot of our kids from America playing in Europe, I think the hope that you can make a living playing professional soccer has been removed. Right. So that motivation is there. And I think it is maintained from the time they start to the time they finish. What happened now is, 16 to 21, we are failing our kids in America. We're failing our kids for a couple of reasons. Rightfully so. It's really hard for a 16 and 17-year-old to make an MLS first team and play competitive games, right? It's very rare, and it should be. If we want our league as a top league in the world, it should be very hard to make it. But MLS Next Pro doesn't provide what it needs to for that age. USL would, because it's a proper professional league. But again, 16 and 17-year-olds, it's hard to remove a 27-year-old guy that's competing for his livelihood, that's played 10 years pro. You're not beating him out as a 16-year-old most times, right? So we in America, we haven't found a way to keep the progress that's at the same rate of the rest of the world from 16 to 21. If you look at our progress from 0 to 15, you could take individual players or teams from 0 to 15 all across the world and see you'll compete favorably. Right? Your players will have favorable athletic and technical and tactical qualities as other people. There's obviously outliers. We had Club America Cup a few weeks ago. A Brazilian team came out. They were unbelievable and far superior to what we have, right? In all ways. But those are kind of the outliers. So 16 to 21. College has to change. It's not enough. They play their games in the fall, and then in the spring they basically have 4 games and very few practices. That doesn't help a kid become a pro, boy or girl. 16 to 18, playing MLS Next Pro or sitting on the bench at MLS 19s when you're a 16-year-old doesn't help. Whereas if you look in Europe, in Brazil, in Argentina, in South America, these 16-year-olds are playing competitive football. It's at a lower league, but they're playing, in the second or third tier of their country's origin, but playing professional football, having to learn how to compete, having to learn how to be successful on the field, understanding what a pro is, what it means to be a pro, right? Our kids they're not learning that, right? The MLS Next Pro, it's all a bunch of kids, right? They're not playing against seasoned veterans. They're playing against kids. It's kids playing kids, and they just changed the name of it. It doesn't help, right? When everyone's playing up, nobody's playing up.
Yeah. No, that makes sense.
Maybe the moniker says you're playing up, but you're actually not playing up. I could change my U12 team to a U14 team, but if they're all 12-year-olds, they're still playing U12 football, right? So that's the biggest gap for me. We haven't found a way to turn our 15-year-old exceptional players into 20. Some have, right? The recent thing came out, Philly Union was the best academy. They're doing a really good job, right? FC Dallas has found a way to do a pretty good job, and there's a few others. But then you look at the likes of LAFC and LA Galaxy, which we're from, right? How many homegrown kids do they have? How many opportunities do the young kids get to play? Yep. Almost never.
And is that, so would you think that in going along with that theme, that there is who is best suited to fill that gap kind of in the current ecosystem in U.S. soccer? Is it USL with kind of what they're trying to do, since the MLS kind of seems to want to stay at the 2 tiers right now? Is it MLS adding a 3rd tier? It sounds like to me it's almost a money problem, right?
Well, you've nailed it. This won't fix until there's more money in the game. Right, like truly fix. The advantage the Europeans have over us is they have so much money that a lower level team is happy to take this 16-year-old and play him, 17-year-old and play him, because he's talented and the parent club is paying for most of his salary. Right? But they're still competing for promotion relegation at the 3rd, 4th, 5th tier of that country. Right? So they're playing for something. They're learning how to compete. And ultimately, when you become a pro, it's only about one thing: winning. That's it, right? No one likes a loser, especially in America. So it's not okay to say, we lost every game this year, but we had a bunch of 17-year-olds on the field. No one's accepting that, right? So how do these kids learn how to win in MLS Next that plays for no promotion relegation, right? How do they learn how to win when all the kids are all the same age and the game is of no consequence and the coach is talking about how they played the whole time? But we played through the back really, really well. Yeah, but you gave up 3 goals doing it and you lost 4-1. In Europe, you get relegated, everyone gets fired, and the fans are burning down the stadium.
Yeah.
So you wonder why our kids aren't successful, because they're not having to compete in the, what we call it the battle dome of death, right? Like, I should have said this in Tryouts. When there's 2 players left on a list and we've got 1 spot, we always go back to, if we put them in the battle dome of death, who's coming out alive? Which one of those 2, right? Our kids aren't experiencing that.
Yep. Man, that's great. Next question along those lines. Knowing that the problem is finding that competitive ecosystem to let those top kids at each age group progress, is there enough collaboration inside of the system, the youth system that exists today?
Yeah. Well, if we have any hope in this country of being the best we can be in soccer, we have to make limits on international players, right? We have to. I mean, the Final Four last year, I don't remember the stat, but it was insane. Like two of the teams, literally 80%, and I don't know the exact number, but it was really large. You can look it up. Were international players that were 23, 24 years old, right? Like, that's so unfair to our 16 and 17 and 18-year-old kid that's trying to, so now they're really good, but they're not quite good enough to play in the MLS because it's almost impossible as a 16, 17-year-old, and it should be, right? So then they go the college route, but then it's almost impossible to make a college team because there's a 23, 24-year-old failed pro in Europe coming and taking their spot. And, no one in their right mind, if the colleges can do it, they're obviously, anybody in the world, if you had a choice of a 24-year-old or a 16-year-old, 17, 18-year-old, you take the 24-year-old, assuming everything else is equal, all day long, right? So college is killing it. On the boys' side, not on the female side as much, but on the boys' side, the college game is killing the youth game. And the only way that stops is if the government gets involved, right? Colleges on their own aren't going to say, hey, we're not going to bring in international kids, but let the other college do it.
Yep.
Right.
They want to win. I mean,
that's exactly right. And you can't blame them for it, right? They're following the rules. The rules are just, just not made properly and with no thought of how we can help soccer. So college has to change. 2, this part is never going to change. It's promotion relegation, right? Every kid's dream in America when they're growing up playing soccer is to play where? In Europe. In Europe. Could be Italy, Spain, France, England, who knows, right? But it's in Europe. And what we miss in this country, if a kid is 24 years old and he's played soccer his whole life in America and he goes to, a club that's competing for promotion, Sheffield United, kind of, up and down club. So they're going there as a highly paid pro, and it's the first time they'll ever experience what it's like to compete, not to go down, right? In America, we all compete to win. Usually in leagues, that's 2 or 3 teams out of the 20, 50, 100 teams. And the other 98% of the league, they're not competing like that. They're not competing to survive. Europe even has that problem now. Where are they going to get a lot of their players? South America. Yep. Right? Why? Because in South America, they're competing to survive from day one. Yep. So how would that change? At the older ages, U.S. Soccer they need to step in and say, it's tiered. We're bringing all the leagues together. It's tiered. It's tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, tier 4, tier 5, and you compete. And if you suck, you go down. If you're great, you go up. And that helps our 16 and 17-year-old kids because I see it in the ECNL and MLS next all the time. There'll be a certain number of kid teams that make the playoffs, right? The first place team has made the playoffs, 10 games left. They stop. Now they're not competing anymore. They're just surviving. The bottom 5 teams have no chance of making the playoffs, so they've checked out. Whereas in Europe, that's the most important time. You're in the bottom 5. How do you get out? Yeah, right?
Win.
Yes. How do you? It's exactly right. So we're not giving our kids those experiences, right? We've come a really long way in America in teaching tactical ideas about soccer. Our kids are far superior technically and tactically than our players were 10, 15, 20 years ago, right? And I will give a lot of credit to U.S. Soccer and the MLS academies for that, right? They've done a really good job of promoting that. But that's where it ends, right? So now we have technically gifted players, tactically, acute players, and physically gifted players. But now we don't know how to compete. And the world now is deciding to go find players that can compete. That's why South America is so dominant, right?
No, that makes sense. I mean, look, it shows on the first team too, right? I think if you look at our players, probably objectively, we've probably never been better from a roster top to bottom, but we have the inability to finish the game and win.
Well, not just that, but we also have players that, for different reasons, and some probably very valid. I'm not calling out any individuals because I don't know them well enough to do that. But a lot of them are opting out of the friendly today or, against Turkey. Whereas you watch France play Spain in the semifinals of Nations League, and there were 4 players that played a Champions League game 3 days before that started and played the entire game.
Yeah. And when they were down 4-0, didn't give in, right?
That's exactly right.
Hey, let's make this a 5-4 game.
Yes.
So we can go home with our heads up, not embarrassed, with our heads between our legs.
No, the accountability in South America and Europe is not the same as it is in America. So we have to manufacture it some. And in order to manufacture it, you have to set up leagues to do so. right? And unfortunately, yes, that means competing and some people losing and some people going down. But that, by the way, isn't that why our kids play sport? To learn failure,
Look,
to learn tough
absolutely.
lessons?
Sports is the best life lessons you can teach kids.
Yes.
If
But
we're
we're
removing the most
protecting them.
important,
Yes, but we're
that's a
protecting them
challenge.
from that so much these days, Jacob. Everyone gets a trophy. No one gets moved down. If my kid doesn't get exactly what he wants,
We move
right?
teams.
Yes, it's exactly right. Sometimes halfway through the year, right?
Yep.
And by the way, as much as we could knock parents for that, there's plenty of coaches out there that aren't doing a great job either, and you should move your kid. So that goes both ways.
No. Awesome. Well, last question, and then we'll kind of wrap it up here, and I think I'm going to get the sense of what the answer is going to be based on what you talked about. But if you were in charge of U.S. Soccer Day, what would be the one thing you would change
The youth system, like
in the promotion relegation manner?
Look, first of all, you narrow it. You narrow the top, right? U.S. Soccer got it right already once. That's the sad thing. They got it right, maybe it was 15, 17 years ago now when they initiated the DA and they limited the number of clubs, right? So, for example, the DA in Southern California when it started, and I want to say, I don't even remember the year, but it was about 15 years ago, they had 8 clubs in Southern California competing in the DA. Guess what that meant? Every kid that wanted to be somewhere went to one of those 8, right? Mm-hmm. So the training sessions were better. Like, forget about coaching now, right? When you put the best 18 players in an area together every single day, yes, coaching is important, but they will get equally or better, quicker just competing with themselves every day, more so than a great coach competing against a bunch of crappy players every day, right? Yep. So that's the first thing they got to do. They got to narrow the top. This is where it is. We have regions. There's a limited number, right? In some regions, the number's 1. It's 1 team. Some it's 2, some it's 5. In Southern California, between San Diego up to LA County and everything in between, it's probably 8 to 10, right? Do you know how many clubs in Southern California can say they are a top flight club now, whether it's ECNL or MLS Next? It's over 30. It's probably over 40.
And it's only
right?
growing.
And it's not stopping. Like, so we've warded it. I was talking to a scout the other day at Club America. He's like, what? We're watching these games, and they were poor, 2 average games. He's like, what's going on? I said, well, you have 40 plus top flight clubs. So every coach tells their kid to stay because it's a top flight team. Yeah. And now you have 40 bang average teams. 15 years ago, we had in Southern California, 8 teams that could compete at any level at U17. In fact, the national team was struggling in the DA, the first couple of years when they were in it. Yeah. Why? Because the field had narrowed. What they should have done, instead of just adding to that, they should have added layers below, right? And if you were good enough to get in, you moved your way up. And if you were bad enough not to stay in, you got moved down. That's where we need to go. U.S. Soccer already has the blueprint. They started it. They started 15, 20 years ago. And that's the only way we change is by going to U.S. Club, ECNL, MLS, and saying, this is what we want to do. This is how we're going to do it. From U19 to U14, this is how it looks, right? U12 and U13, everybody's in the same league. You're competing. And at U14, you start moving into a promotion relegation fight from day one, right?
And I think the important thing is the ECNL is a business. They're not going to do anything to lose, to not continue to make more money, right? Same thing with MLS Next, right? To me, that doesn't have to be a barrier here. You can still live inside of those ecosystems and reward the top of that ecosystem, right? Whoever comes out of the ECNL, right? Now that is who's going to make it into this DA academy or this concept. So like that's the one thing that I always feel like people are like, oh, well, we can just do this. But you got to live inside the confines of reality. And yes, I think all those leagues can continue to grow and can continue to make more money, right? At the same time, we can reward those inside of those. So I love that. Hopefully somebody's listening that can take some action. But I'm sure it wouldn't be the first time they've heard it.
No, it wouldn't be. It wouldn't be.
So, cool. Well, I appreciate you taking the time today. Great information here. Love the insights. And you guys have East playoffs coming up here soon.
Yeah, 3 weeks. Starts on the 25th, I believe, 26th. So
awesome. How many teams y'all have this year?
It's the best time of year. Like, like training kids and making them better is why we do it, right? Because we love that process. But at the end of the day, this is where the bread is buttered, so to speak, right? Yeah. You get to compete best on best, who can win, who can find ways to win, and it's really, I'm looking forward to it.
Well, good luck this year. Hopefully you can replicate or increase success from last year. I know it'll be a tough thing to do, but good luck trying.
We're going to try to replicate it. We're not going to get more than 4 national championships. If we got 2, if we got 1, I'd be happy. So
Yeah. Awesome. Well,
thanks,
good
Jacob.
luck. Thanks for the time and have a good
Yeah,
one.
of course. Talk to you.
Yep.
Bye.